Are you a trailblazer, a risk taker? Even the boldest starts somewhere. And the legendary Defender? It's ready for your next great adventure. Capable, iconic, reimagined. This May, join fellow adventure seekers at Destination Defender in Port Jervis, New York, May 16th through the 18th. Outdoor activities, delicious food, live music, an unforgettable weekend for Defender owners and enthusiasts. To learn more, please visit DestinationDefenderUSA.com and explore the full Defender lineup at LandRoverUSA.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. By the time you hear about a data breach, your information has already been exposed for months. On average, companies take 277 days to report a breach. That's 9 months where hackers have access to your personal data. That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Aura is an all-in-one digital safety solution that monitors the dark web for your phone number, email, and social security number, sending real-time alerts if your info is found. It also includes a VPN, password manager, and data broker removal to help keep you safe. For a limited time, Aura is offering a 14-day free trial plus a dark web scan to check if your personal information has been leaked, all for free at aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up and protect your loved ones. That's AURA.com/safety. Terms apply. Check the site for details.
Welcome to episode number 272 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Auntie Boo, Shanna, Jen, Jan McQueen, Annie Favaza, Cynthia, and Mahala. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week. Our film review is Gretel and Hansel. Gretel and Hansel was released in 2020. It has 5.5 out of 10 on IMDb and 63% on Rotten Tomatoes. When their mother descends into madness, siblings Gretel and Hansel must fend for themselves in the dark and unforgiving woods. Hungry and scared, they fortuitously stumble upon a bounty of food left in an isolated home. Invited inside by the seemingly friendly owner, the children soon suspect that her generous but mysterious behaviour is part of a sinister plan to do them harm. So as always, we're going to split this into likes and dislikes. And there's a lot to like about this film. Genuinely, it is visually stunning. It is so interesting to look at. It's also filmed in Dublin in Ireland, which made me very happy. But there is a lot of triangle imagery, which led me down a rabbit hole of reading why triangles are used in folk horror, right? Really interestingly, the triangle as a shape is one that we intuitively are suspicious of as humans due to its sharpness. How interesting is that? The harsh edges and corners make us suspicious and wary of triangles, which I just thought was a really interesting little facet into the human psyche. It also represents the Holy Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But in folk tales, it often represents the divine feminine, which is really important in this film, and everything that encompasses the divine feminine, like the woman as a fertile being, the woman as like an old hag, the woman as child, and the triangle is meant to represent that divine femininity, which I loved. Didn't know that was a thing. And the triangles in this film are used in really stark contrast to the natural surroundings. So you're obviously in a woods, in a forest, and then you've got these really sharply triangular buildings and houses, which is interesting. And there's also shades of that in Midsummer as well, the film Midsummer by Ari Aster, which is a great film, and I don't think I really understood it properly at the time. And I read somewhere that this film is essentially just young adult horror, which I thought was really apt. I thought that was a really good way of describing it. That doesn't take away from the film, but I do think it's a good descriptor. I think the performances are really good in this, so I really liked the performances of Gretel and Hansel, and I also loved the design of the witch in the woods, right? Not only does she live in an incredible black triangle house in the middle of the woods, sign me up, but she also just is a cool, nuanced and interesting character. And there was something about her that I really liked and really warmed to, weirdly. Even though she's this freaky woman who does awful things, I kind of was weirdly on her side. I was like, yes, okay, women are very important and men are just distractions and we should fatten men up and eat them. I was kind of on board with that. I also loved the costume design for the witch. I thought that she just fundamentally looked really cool in comparison to the children. And there were some really freaky moments in this film, right? That actually gave me the heebie-jeebies, that made me go, oh no, what's that? Oh, I hate that. I don't want to see that again. There is a notable mention for the girl in the pink hat, little freak running around the place. There's also a bit in the beginning where they go into this house, they think it's empty, and it's not empty. It's not empty. It's very much not empty, and it's a very scary moment. This is very much a folk horror story, in that it's a slow burn. There's lots of symbolism in there. There's lots of references to Gretel kind of growing up, becoming a woman, becoming in touch with her own power, her sense of self, her femininity, and it embraces the subversion of this story of Hansel and Gretel that we grew up with and have known all of our lives. And I was here for it. You know what? I was here for it. And look, there is stuff to not like about this film. Like, it is admittedly a bit bonkers and feels like a fever dream sometimes. So there are like genuine dream sequences, and I just fundamentally don't like dream sequences in films. They just annoy me, because really scary stuff happens within a dream sequence and then you're like, oh, it's actually just a dream, so it's not that scary at all. That's just a personal bugbear. Like, these dream sequences, I suppose, were important to the plot because it was Gretel making sense of the world around her and understanding her place in the world and understanding the threats that were present that they weren't fully seeing. I got all of that, but there were points where I was like, what is happening? Where are we? Oh, it's a dream. Okay, that's where we are. And I guess at times it probably will feel a bit slow because of the language that is used. It's kind of, like I said, it's a very traditional storytelling type of vibe, and the language can seem a bit archaic, and to some degree people speak almost in riddles. And I personally don't mind that kind of storytelling, but it might not be everybody's cup of tea. I also found that felt a bit at odds with some of the portrayal of witches in the film, because there's one witch in particular that I felt she was really modern, and it didn't really make much sense to me in terms of trying to contextualize place and time for this story. She was sort of covered in tattoos, and I was a bit like, where are we? What time period are we in? So that felt a little bit at odds. And I guess, fundamentally, it's not a horror film in the traditional sense, right? There are scary bits. There are definitely bits that freaked me out. You're not going to find like big Hollywood jump scares and violin music, you know what I mean? And I think it's one of those films that would be quite Marmite. Anytime I say that it's quite Marmite, people outside the UK and Ireland are like, what? So Marmite is a yeast-based spread here in the UK that is, quite popular, but people either love it or they hate it. It's a very polarizing thing. And I guess you could definitely call this like very much a grim fairy tale folk style of telling this story of Hansel and Gretel. And look, I enjoyed it. I think it's definitely worth an afternoon watch. It definitely feels like a young adult horror. There's elements of it that I know that people aren't going to like. There's elements of it, like I said, that felt a bit bonkers and felt like a fever dream. But I respected it for being a fresh take on a fairy tale and giving it that real grim fairy tale style. I was here for it, and I really loved the witch. I thought she was cool. So I'm going to give Gretel and Hansel 3 stars. And that's a 3 stars as in, yeah, definitely give it a go. It was fun. I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed the storytelling elements of it, and you might too. So that is 3 stars for Gretel and Hansel.
Are you a trailblazer, a risk taker? Even the boldest starts somewhere. And the legendary Defender? It's ready for your next great adventure. Capable, iconic, reimagined. This May, join fellow adventure seekers at Destination Defender in Port Jervis, New York, May 16th through the 18th. Outdoor activities, delicious food, live music, an unforgettable weekend for Defender owners and enthusiasts. To learn more, please visit DestinationDefenderUSA.com and explore the full Defender lineup at LandRoverUSA.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. Imagine waking up to find your bank account drained, bills for loans you never took out, a warrant for your arrest, all because someone stole your identity. Hackers aren't waiting. Why are you? That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Your personal data is a goldmine for hackers, and Aura helps lock it down. Aura monitors the dark web, blocks data brokers from selling your information, includes a VPN for private browsing, and a password manager to secure your accounts before criminals break in. For a limited time, Aura is offering our listeners a 14-day free trial plus a dark web scan to check if your personal information has been leaked, all for free at aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up and start protecting yourself and your loved ones. That's aura.com/safety. Terms apply. Check the site for details.
Which brings us to our stories this week. Now, our stories this week are told by the wonderful Tim Cloke, not by me. If you are new to the podcast and this is your first time listening, Tim is a longtime friend of mine and friend of the podcast. You can find the links to everywhere that Tim is active in the description of this episode. And also, this episode was recorded remotely, so if there are any audio anomalies, that will be why. I hope you enjoy it. Please go subscribe to Tim's YouTube channel and check him out wherever he is active, and I hope you enjoy. And I'm joined in the studio today by the man who makes Tom Selleck quake in his boots, the wonderful Tim Cloke. Tim, how are you and your moustache?
I swear that these things get more ridiculous every time you introduce me, but I can't argue with it this time. I am sporting an utterly ridiculous 70s style moustache, aren't I?
It's not ridiculous. It's a good moustache. I like it.
Thank you very much. Award-winning, you might say. I grew it for... Or rather, I shaved my beard off around it for a fancy dress outfit. What's the American phrase for fancy dress? Because fancy dress to them is getting all black tie and bow ties. Costume party, that's it. We had a big town costume party, and I won Best Adult Individual. So I've got a great big silver cup downstairs. So yes, this is my award-winning moustache.
A great big silver cup and a great big moustache. What's
not
to love?
Quite right. And with a audio medium like this, it's absolutely the best place for it, I think.
So Tim, if people haven't heard you on the podcast before, which is unlikely, I mean, if you're starting at this one, hello. Tim, who are you and why are you here to talk to us today?
Well, as I always say, first and foremost, I'm your friend, but also I'm a history teacher from Devon. I've got my own history YouTube channel as well, and I've been very lucky that you've let me on the podcast several times to tell spooky stories with a historical slant, and people have been very kind and liked them. So I'm back again.
And what are we going for today?
Well, back last year, in 31 Days of Terror, we did our first episode on battlefield ghost stories, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've got some more for you. Now, I'm aware that last time we tried to fit 4 in, and we did, and we went absolutely stark staring mad trying to do it, didn't we?
Yeah, that was a big undertaking. Not for me. I just had to sit here, but your brain does start to slowly decompress, even though you don't want it to, and you're like, no, please hold on to your words. And then that was the Gettysburg goat sitch, wasn't it?
Incident, yeah, that's right. And it's a lighter evening now. Neither of us are as tired as we were, and so I've not tried to bite off more than I can chew tonight. We're going to have a look at just 2 battlefields, 2 very, very different battlefields. So I was very heartened by the kind feedback that I got from the last one. People seem to quite like the format of me giving the history of the battle and then going into the folklore that stems from that history. So I've gone for the same format tonight, and I hope that people will enjoy these historical stories and then the ghosts and folklore that stem from them.
Shall we dive right into it?
You want to go straight into our first battle?
Let's do it.
All right, here goes. England's violent history has seen many civil wars to decide who sits on the throne and governs. One of the most destructive must surely be the one we now know today as the Wars of the Roses, a turbulent 32 years where one faction seemed to have decided the matter only to be challenged again. This was not really one war, but a series of interconnected and related conflicts, each devastating. The name is derived from the two great noble houses who vied for power, not Stark and Lannister, but York and Lancaster. Each of these northern counties has a rose as an emblem, red for Lancashire and white for Yorkshire, and it is from these symbols that the modern name is drawn. In 1422, Henry VI of the House of Lancaster became king. He was 9 months old. His royal father, Henry V, had won a stunning victory at Agincourt in 1415 and was set to inherit the greatest prize of all, the throne of France. And then, sickness, in the form of the dreaded bloody flux, struck him while he was on campaign and took his life mere weeks before the death of the French king. Henry VI might be forgiven his weaknesses, having lost any chance of being tutored in the art of kingship. He was a pious man, but by contemporary reports, mentally unsound, weak and dithering. The mismanagement of his regents and later his own rule lost England the 100 Years' War, after France rallied behind a peasant girl named Joan and her divine message. Henry encouraged competition and infighting amongst his nobles to preserve his grip on the crown, and in truth, were it not for the remarkable gifts of his queen, Margaret of Anjou, his reign would have collapsed far earlier. It was in this context that two mighty armies met at a field near Towton, south of York, on the 29th of March 1461. It was Palm Sunday, but it would be no day of religious reflection. The Lancastrian side was led by the Dukes of Somerset and Exeter, fighting on behalf of the ineffectual Henry VI, who had not the qualities to lead men in battle. Opposing them was a force led by Edward, that month declared King Edward VI by Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, Kingmaker. Edward led the army, with the vanguard having Baron Fauconberg to the fore. England could not have two kings, and so this fight between an estimated 50,000 men would decide the matter. Edward had inherited the Yorkist claim to the throne after his father Richard had been killed a year earlier. He was young, tall and brave. He would need those qualities to inspire his forces against what was at first a superior force. He awaited reinforcements by the Duke of Norfolk, but could have no certainty as to when his forces would arrive. As the battle began, heavy snow began to fall on the shivering knights and men-at-arms. Fauconberg noted that the snow blew briskly into the faces of their foes, and this had not been lost on Edward either. They ordered forward those men carrying some of the most feared weapons of the day in a characteristically aggressive move. These men held in their calloused and powerful hands the iconic ranged weapon of the day, the longbow. 6 or more feet of yew or similar wood fashioned into an elegant but deadly weapon. Medieval bows were known to have draw weights of over 100 pounds. Their range could exceed 250 metres easily, and 300 metres wasn't beyond imagining. The bowmen were built with powerful shoulder muscles, honed from a lifetime of training in the art of archery, to the extent that to this day their bones pay witness to their immense strength. When the Yorkist bowmen drew their bows, tilted them skywards, and loosed their arrows, the strong wind blew them deep within the Lancastrian ranks, causing chaos and terror. This was an age of plate armour, but only the wealthiest could afford that. The arrows were tipped with bodkin points, needle-like hardened steel projectiles that split through mail armour, and in rare cases even steel plate, to cause grievous harm to anyone unlucky enough to come between the falling arrow and the earth. The Lancastrians sent their own archers forward, but the blizzard of snow and arrows hitting them in the face, they struggled to find their range, and the opposing winds did the rest. The Lancastrian arrows fell short, and the outnumbered Yorkists had drawn first blood. Sensing the panic building in their own ranks, the Lancastrians charged at Edward's positions. The Yorkist archers retreated behind their army's men-at-arms, but not before placing arrows in the ground to hinder the Lancastrian advance. Soon, though, Lancastrian cavalry slammed into the Yorkist left. As bodies scattered in the face of the charge, Edward himself had to ride in and re-establish order. In the centre, though, the initial shock of the Yorkist arrows had worn off, and a bloody stalemate ensued, neither side able to force the other to yield. Snow settled on a ground made brown sludge by the passage of so many thousands of feet and hooves, and eventually it turned slick with freezing blood. Some chroniclers describe the battle as lasting for 10 hours, but eventually, with the arrival of Norfolk's reinforcements, the Yorkists pressed forward, and the Lancastrians fell into a rout. Discarding their helmets and shields to more swiftly flee the field, they could not outrun Norfolk's fresh men, who easily cut them down in a merciless slaughter. No quarter had been expected. No quarter was given. Towton was almost certainly the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. As many as 13,000 out of the 50,000 men present lay slain, and countless lay wounded. Defeat led Henry VI into exile, and Edward IV to the throne. However, it seems many of the souls of the departed could not, in fact, depart this place.
So I've got a question for you right before we do anything else.
Go on.
What is bloody flux? Like, what does that mean in terms of modern disease?
Basically dysentery. It was known as that because eventually you'd know you're reaching the end stages, because essentially the stools would turn to blood. There's a lovely phrase for anyone who's eating their dinner right now, isn't it? So yeah, the bloody flux was an archaic term for campaign sickness, or dysentery as it was known, and it just afflicted so many people, because getting clean water sources when you're out in the field with so many people essentially using the same water courses as a sewer is not easy, and that's what saw off Henry V.
Wow. And I'd imagine then, of course, because you've got, whatever it was that you said, 50,000 men essentially all meeting each other in battle, like that illness and disease must spread like wildfire in those conditions.
It's so hard to express just what a large number of people that is in a medieval context.
Yeah.
If you've got a town of 2,000 people, that is a seriously big town for the day. And then you get 50,000 people turn up. Where are they going to get their food from?
Yeah, where are they getting their food and their fresh water?
And this is the big thing about medieval logistics, and why actually most medieval warfare was what we would today call limited, because it only really happened between the spring and the end of the summer before the roads got too wet. Here you got a bit of unseasonably snowy weather, which must have been a bit of a shock. But at least in those conditions, the ground is frozen, so it's easy to get along the roads, or easier than it might be. And you can only really do it when the larders are stocked, and before the spring, you're really relying on the last of whatever supplies you've got left. I mean, there's a reason why we have Lent at that time of year. It's partly for religious reasons, of course, but from a practical point of view, it's when you've got nothing in the cupboards. Yeah. So yeah, 50,000 people is an unbelievably huge number, and imagine the thousands of horses as well.
Oh my God, yeah, horses, equipment, like it just 50,000 people. Is a mad number to think about, to try and contextualize and visualize.
It is, and these are modern estimates. So when you read the medieval estimates, they say it's 100,000. And you just couldn't support that. That's not unrealistic. But before long, only within a few months of going on campaign, most of these men need to be released, because they need to be back in their fields growing the food that the country needs. And frankly, if you don't release them, they're just going to go anyway. So the fact that so many men arrived at the Battle of Towton, and the fact that so many never left, is absolutely remarkable. Most medieval battles, a few hundred are killed, and one side goes, that's enough of that, we're off. But Towton is almost uniquely bloody in that respect.
Why is this one so particularly bloody? Like, because I didn't realize, obviously, that, in battles in this time period, men would just be like, listen, I've got to fucking go. Like, I can't be here fighting for indefinitely. Like, I've got to go and tend my farm and stuff. So why did they stay longer here?
I think it's not so much that they stayed longer here, it's just that they were determined to settle this dispute.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Because it is, like I say, it's a 10-hour battle, we think. But that's still going to get done and dusted in a day, isn't it? My interpretation of this, and there's probably historians would disagree with me, but that's the nature of the business, is because you had two declared kings who were pretty well equally supported. And that's not a situation that can stand in the medieval society of the time. You need to decide that. You can't just sort of finish the day and say, all right, we'll have a rematch next week. It's more or less a fight to the death, this. And although both of the proclaimed kings, Henry VI and Edward IV, survived the battle, it was very obvious by the end of this that Henry VI's grip on power was essentially gone. And so it was decisive in that respect.
Okay, that makes more sense. It was basically, this is going to be the decider. We know this is going to be the decider, so we're hanging on in there for that.
And then, of course, 24 years later, there's the even more decisive Battle of Bosworth Field, where the Lancastrians win under Henry VII, as he becomes, and a certain Richard III, who you know well, was slain.
Yes, and here's our obligatory Richard III mention for.
I'm sure it's not the last one.
Every
I think
episode.
I've got another one later on as well. We've got to have one, haven't
Fantastic.
we?
Yeah, it has to be in there. Like, we can't not.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you know a little bit about the Wars of the Roses, I imagine, from having played the part. Had you heard of the Battle of Towton before?
Not that I remember.
No.
Now, granted, it was a long time ago that I played that role.
Yeah.
That's about 10 years ago now.
Goodness me.
Oh, yes, it is about 10 years ago. But, and I sort of knew nothing about the Wars of the Roses, to be really frank. Like, I knew it was sort of House of York, House of Lancaster, fight. One house as a king, the other house as a, I sort of knew the basics.
Yeah.
But the actual, when you look at who's who, fuck me, it's intricate. Do you know what I mean? You're
really
like, who's that? That's whose son? Who's this woman? Who is she? And whose house does she belong to? You know what I mean? So it is intricate, but I don't remember that battle.
No, I mean, this is it. It should really be better known because it is that pivotal and that bloody. I think as much as anything else, we almost owe it to the people who fought it to remember the slaughter as well. But of course, that you mentioned all the families and the intricacies and the family trees of who's in and who's out. That's really one of the political genius moves of Henry VII is that he marries Elizabeth of York. And that's very much an accepted marriage saying, look,
let's join these houses together. Yeah,
we are a married couple now. We have joined these two houses through marriage, and actually, as royal marriages go, they had a pretty good one and a pretty long one, and it worked. And there's so many remarkable women involved with this as well. I've mentioned Margaret of Anjou. And then later on, you've got Margaret Beaufort, who was the mother of Henry VII, also a Torrington woman, I like to say. Well, she lived here for 2 years. That's good enough for me.
Yeah, come on, that's good enough.
It's good enough, isn't it? That counts. Elizabeth of York herself was a very calm political operator. Even Margaret Beaufort, she outlived Henry VII. She just lived into King Henry VIII's reign as well. So it's a famous and fascinating period of history. But I think one of the tragedies here is you got this awful bloodshed. But in the long run, in the really long run, it didn't really settle anything. They did it all again in 24 years' time.
As is often the case, isn't it? It's all this bloodshed, and then what does it actually achieve? Do you know what I mean?
This is it. And there are various parts of the battlefield, which we're going to get into, and I've not really mentioned them yet, which were focal points for the savagery that happened that day.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it's those places that become the focal points for the folklore and for the hauntings that follow. But there's a part that we're going to go into as well, where I think it's worth recognizing the physical mortal remains that we have from that day. And that, again, themselves might provide us with something for a focal point for explaining the weird goings on that have been reported there.
Oh, go on. I'm excited.
So should we start getting into the folklore?
Yes, please.
Let's do it. I have said already that the departed could not, in fact, depart the battlefield. And in a literal sense, this references the fact that the dead were piled into mass graves in and around Towton. However, we also know that some were left to putrefy, their remains used to fertilise the fields. Chroniclers describe how the stream by the battlefield ran red with Yorkist and Lancastrian blood for 2 days after the battle. We can see how the ground at Towton was quite literally corrupted by the blood and bones of the fallen. Could this, along with the savagery of the battle, explain the sheer number of hauntings reportedly associated with the battlefield at Towton? One old legend of the battlefield, not reported for many years, is that of the Towton Rose. Wild roses commonly sprout in the hedgerows and scrubland by English fields. Their flowers are smaller and less dense with petals than their garden equivalents, but they have a delicate beauty, and their thorny stems protect them from the attentions of browsing animals. They can be red, but they are more often white, except for the Towton rose. The legend says that the white roses bloom with petals tinged in red, like linen stained with blood upon the edges. Could these roses be corrupted by the bloodshed too? Or perhaps this is just the folk symbolism of the Yorkist victory soaked in so much Lancastrian blood. The tale claims that these roses in fact thrived on the blood-soaked land, being unable to grow elsewhere if picked or transplanted. Supernatural? Or just the fertilizing quality that so much death brought to the land? It's a charming tale, but perhaps one that stretches credulity somewhat. Much of the haunting at this site is focused on the remains of the slain, though. The stream that runs to the west of the battlefield is known as Cock Beck, and many Lancastrians tried in vain to cross it during the vicious rout at the end of the battle. While it can be waded through, those that attempted to in 1461 were hampered by the floating ice and freezing shock of the water. They were often struck from above as Norfolk's cavalry charged them down, their blood foaming in the war-spoiled waters. One of the few places where men might go dry foot over the beck was at the small stone bridge, no more than a pack-horse crossing. Here, a bottleneck of fleeing Lancastrians became fodder for the Yorkist swords. The bridge ever since has been known as the Bridge of Bodies, and sure as the dead piled up, the terrified yet living used their backs as crossings. It is said that under the right circumstances, the howls of the dying can still be heard amidst the splashing waters of the streams. Cavalry played an important part in both the Lancastrian attack and their rout, so reports of the sound of thundering hooves and whinnying steeds might hardly be surprising, or that interesting, given the very many similar accounts of such manifestations on so many battlefields. But could these phantom horses and riders also be visible to the mortal eye? On March the 29th, 2018, precisely 557 years to the day from the battle, a group of 3 ghost hunters set off after dark to see if they could capture evidence of the paranormal. It has been said that every 7 years the sounds of the battle can be heard on the wind once more, but this anniversary did not coincide with such a year. However, the investigators heard the soft beat of a horse's hooves, but in the failing light, could this have been a living horse nearby? One of the trio, Neil Cook, said that of the visit, "All night long we had the feeling that we were being followed. We kept hearing a thud like the sound of a hoof stamping on the ground. It was as if someone on horseback was following us all around. That's what it sounded like." Towards the end of their visit to Towton, the 3 men took a low-light selfie on one of the small roads on the battlefield. Indeed, these roads likely predate the battle and are known to have been an important factor in the rapid deployment of both armies, so they have a relevance to the events that took place in 1461. Sure enough, behind the smiling men can be seen an eerie shape in the field, apparently half obscured by high crops or grass. It appears to be a dark horse and a pale figure riding upon it. The proportions and size appear suggestive of a warhorse of the era. But what did the photographer have to say when interviewed by a newspaper after the event? Well, to quote, "Looking at the picture, a lot of people have said that it looks like 2 soldiers. But I do believe in pareidolia, where we can make faces out of things," he said. "I believe it is a gentleman on horseback. The dark mass is the shoulders, and the head of the horse that is slightly turned, and the figure stood with the horse or sat on it," adding, it could well have been a flock of birds or a puff of smoke or something in the distance, but it was so close and strong to be that really. There was no explanation, so we put it down to the paranormal. As ever with such pictures, you are invited to find it and judge for yourself. Perhaps these reputed hauntings might be linked to the genuinely shocking and gruesome nature of the fighting in the snow that Palm Sunday so very many years ago. Estimating the number of dead is tremendously difficult, as so few primary sources survive, and those that do almost inevitably exaggerate both the size of the armies and the numbers of the slain. Claims as high as 30,000 dead have been made, though around half that number seems more realistic, yet scarcely less horrific. It is still a chilling level of slaughter, whichever way you cut it. This is all made more difficult by the apparent desecration and destruction of so many of the bodies. However, a chance discovery by archaeologists provided a tantalizing insight into the men who fought the battle. Can these bones add flesh to the stories of hauntings? It had been known that, in the period of the brief Yorkist resurgence under Richard III, that king had specially tried to honour his northern brethren by ordering the disinterment and reburying of some of the dead of Towton. He ordered that a chantry chapel be built at the site so that prayers for the dead might be sung to ease their passage through purgatory and into everlasting life. This chantry was never completed, and its unfinished and unprotected walls fell into ruin and were robbed away, leaving no trace. That was until 1996, when archaeologists uncovered the remains of some of those cleaved and bludgeoned dead from the Battle of Towton. What they found reveals the savagery of late medieval warfare. 50 bodies were excavated. They were all men, ranging in height from 5 feet to 6 feet tall, and aged from their late teens to their early 50s. Some of the older individuals had evidence that they were seasoned veterans, with marks upon their bones indicative of healed wounds. One skeleton, the 25th excavated and therefore dispassionately known as Towton 25, was the most brutally killed. Probably brought down in the rout, his helmet discarded, archaeologists identified 8 wounds to his head alone. I will relate them to you now in the order in which they were inflicted. There were 5 blows to the left side of his skull from a bladed weapon, likely a sword. Incredibly, these blows would have stunned him or made him unconscious, but they were not fatal. Then, to the back of the skull, there was a heavy blow to the back of the head which cracked his skull like an eggshell, probably from a blunt object, and another which opened a large gash. Bone fragments from these wounds would have penetrated the brain, almost certainly ending his life. Then, the unnecessary coup de grace, a horrifying wound to the face, which split it diagonally in two from left eye to right jawbone. Other wounds identified on bodies included sharp diamond cross-section puncture wounds, blunt smashing fractures, and lethal sharp cuts. All of these wounds could be given by the poleaxe of the age. Specifically wrought to puncture armour with a hardened spike, cave in helmets with a blunt mallet, or cleave flesh and bones with a heavy axe blade, this weapon is the author of many of the wounds found on the dead of Towton. Could this level of extreme violence explain the level of activity on the battlefield today? The sounds of anguished moans and screams at the bridge of bodies, the blood-soaked river, and the Towton roses. The sound of hooves on earth, and perhaps even the sight of phantom horsemen. The bloodiest battlefield in the British Isles surely has more secrets to divulge. Perhaps the Towton Rose really does sometimes sprout upon the field, a silent, delicate tribute to a brutal and indelicate age.
That level of savagery has actually shocked me.
I have goosebumps. Genuinely, I have goosebumps having read it. It's
like to think. I often think about. Often she says, but I've said this before. We've talked about it. How a lot of this combat was just brutal, hand to hand, people beating each other to death, right? And I think, and I've said this to you before, I think one of the best portrayals of that is the Michael Fassbender Macbeth.
Yeah.
Because it's just savage. But that level of that man had, what was it, 8 blows to the head?
8 blows to the head on its own, yeah. That's not including anything that was found on his body. That is sustained. That is somebody going to town, or a number of people going to town on this person. That's hatred, is what that is.
That's hatred. You sort of imagine that it's just, it would be just slash and go. Because that's what's portrayed in films, isn't it? That they stab and move on to the next person. But this was that is absolute hatred.
And this is during the rout, very likely, so they don't feel like they're under much threat themselves. So they just do what they want.
So they just went for it.
And from the point of view of the hauntings of the ghost stories there, I mean, this is about as extreme as it gets in terms of violence, isn't it? Is that what is supposedly leaving such an echo here? And I don't know, it makes your blood run cold to think of people fighting with that savagery, essentially over which posh bloke is going to rule the country.
I know.
And I'm simplifying it there. I know I'm simplifying it there, but in a way, that's what it's about.
But fundamentally, that is what is at the heart of it. Which posh fella with loads of money is going to run the country?
Yeah.
Let's all these not posh people beat the shit out of each other.
And in this period of history, they both believe in the same God, and they both worship that God in the same way. So it's not over anything like that.
It's not over religion.
Yeah. It's just a real awful insight into the darkness of that these conflicts brought.
And you sort of think that, you've got 50,000 men estimated, and this battlefield is obviously savage, brutal. Surely that does something to the landscape itself. You know what I mean? And I know that you're talking about this rose and the river's running red with blood.
And the bridge.
And the bridge of bodies, that is horrific. The thought of that is horrific, and the sound of the howling, and maybe the landscape just doesn't forget. Maybe that's what it is. And we talk all the time on the podcast about stone tape theory and all that jazz. If you've got that level of emotionality and violence and hatred and anger and fear, because not everybody there is going to be full of hatred.
Yeah.
Not everybody there is going to be committing sustained attacks on people. Some people are just there going, oh shit,
Yeah.
I am terrified. Surely that level of emotionality has some sort of impact on the landscape.
And you've got 30-odd thousand guys who didn't die that day, who
Oh my God,
would have
yeah.
taken that trauma home with them as well.
Imagine taking that trauma home. And I this is beside the point. Have you seen the film Warfare has been advertised recently?
No, I've not.
So it's an Alex Garland film, who did 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
And the film Men as well. But it is a film that is based on a true story about a group of American soldiers in Iraq who are doing a kind of standard operation, and the operation goes wrong, right? It's a true story. I went to see it a couple of weeks ago, and I genuinely, that episode of The Simpsons where Marge is really anxious and she's, you think she's sitting on the sofa, but she's actually just sort of hovering in the middle of the room as though she's sitting down. That was me watching the film. It was,
my word!
But it was that level of, and I came away from it thinking, how did they keep going? And that goes for all soldiers. When you know that there is a very real possibility that you are going to die, how do you bypass that fear to keep going? That blows my mind.
I think it's completely inexplicable. I mean, when you look at tales of what I suppose we term heroism and bravery, very often it's hard to tell just from who they are and their background. But I can give you a couple of brief examples. I don't think this is particularly paranormal, but it's certainly a weird coincidence. I've not researched this in time, so I am having to go from memory here. Are you familiar with the Victoria Cross?
Yes.
So the Victoria Cross, for anyone who isn't aware, is the highest award for gallantry and bravery that is open to British and Commonwealth soldiers. So, Australians have been awarded them in the Vietnam War, for example. It's not just British soldiers in the World Wars. But there are streets in Canada that have 2 or 3 winners. Where has that come from? Is it just because they were taking part in a particular action where there was the opportunity to do it? There's about 3 Victoria Crosses where a father and a son have both won it. So where has that come from? But my favourite statistic is about 2/3 of all Victoria Cross winners were either the eldest son, and therefore the responsible son of a family with an early widowed mother, or they were otherwise responsible for their siblings.
So is that a case of, see, that kind of shit blows my mind, right? Because that says
really
something about
you,
the human
it?
condition. Because is that something to do with those boys thinking, so say like the eldest son with an early widowed mother, or the eldest son who had a responsibility for the family, is that them, and it's ingrained in them that, fuck me, if I don't survive this, what's going to happen to my siblings?
I don't think it is that.
Is it that?
I think it's no. I'll tell you why, because more people die winning the Victoria Cross than survive the action.
Oh, Christ.
So I think it's more a case of them saying, I'm the one who's responsible for getting my mates out of this. So I'm going to do something about it.
So I'm being the responsible one within this particular, situation.
So they see their, if you like, surrogate brothers around them having to go through hell, being killed, having to kill. And they go, nope, I'm not having this. I've grown up having looked after people I consider to be my responsibility. So if anyone's going to get us out of this, it's me.
I was thinking about the Victoria Cross as only being awarded to people who are alive, but that's ridiculous. Of course, people have died and gotten the Victoria Cross.
Most die.
Yeah.
I mean, the stories that go with it are so insane. We maybe go off a bit of a tangent here, so feel free to cut it out. But in order to get it, it's so insane how selfless the bravery has to be. I mean, there's a famous story of a man called John Cruikshank who was flying a plane in World War II, and they attacked a submarine, and the submarine shot them up, but they managed to sink the submarine as well. But he had to fly that plane home, and he had 72 wounds, including to both lungs, so he could hardly breathe. And one of his crew members was dead. Several of the others were wounded. But he was there saying, well, I'm the only one who can fly this thing. I've got to get this home, and I've got to get this down on the water, and I've got to land. And he gets home, and his plane's too heavy with fuel still, so he has to fly around and burn a bit more off. The sea's too rough, so he needs to find the right place to land it. And all the time, he's gasping for breath.
Yeah.
And they very nearly turned him down for the Victoria Cross because, of course, by landing the plane, he's saving himself as well as everyone else. You can't win, can you, really?
Oh, you just can't fucking win.
No.
Listen.
But although this is a little bit removed from what happened at Towton, we know pretty well that the retinues of these medieval lords who raised their levy soldiers, who were often the regular rank and file, these are average guys who, as part of their feudal responsibilities, have to serve in the army here and there. They're going to be people from the same families. They're going to be people from the same communities. There's an analogue there with the terrible stories of the Pals battalions who were chewed up in the Battle of the Somme, where all of a sudden, completely without having meant to, and I think we might have mentioned this years ago when we talked about the Angel of Mons on Patreon, where communities would just have the guts ripped from them because they weren't thinking of these guys going into the same action and then all of them getting killed with machine guns or wounded and everything. But there is that sense of brotherhood and responsibility with it. And all of these emotions, they've got to leave a mark on the landscape. And I don't know how many times you've walked down the ancient sunken roads around Canterbury where you're not on the modern roads and just thought to yourself, what echoes am I walking in the footsteps of here? You know that those banks and those hedges are so high because hundreds or possibly thousands of years of feet and horses and armies and traders and carts have worn them down. And you are just the latest in a massive long line of people who've done the same thing. And that's got to be the same at Towton, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, really, isn't it?
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think that you can appreciate what's gone before wherever you are. It just takes a little bit of an imagination and a little bit of an inquiry into, well, what was here? And maybe people who are listening can take that with them when they go out and about. Are we ready to go on to our second battle?
Yeah, I'm a bit shook after that one. I'm not really sure why. I think it's just.
Oh, I think I know why, because it's horrible. Yeah, it's a really savage battle. I mean, not many laughs in this episode, perhaps, but with this stuff, it's a long time ago. But my word, it's serious, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's pretty serious.
Well, maybe there might be a few bits on the next one which are a little bit more tongue in cheek, especially with my delivery of it. So maybe that'll alter the mood a little bit. Emma, just out of curiosity, you've got a lot of our friends across the pond listen to this podcast, haven't you? Yeah, this is what makes me a bit nervous for the next one because it's about the Revolutionary War. Now,
tread carefully.
Fans of things that happened will know that, of course, the British lost the Revolutionary War, and we got a great friend out of it in the end. But yeah, at the time, that's a really big deal.
Yes.
You know, for a long time, Lord North, who was the Prime Minister at that time, was considered the worst Prime Minister in British history, possibly superseded in recent times, but we shall see. But yeah, this would have been a real bone of contention. So I hope that what I'm about to do will be taken in the spirit with which it's intended. But I will expand upon that in a moment. Shall we get into our next battle?
Yeah, let's get into it.
When, in the course of events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With these words, and those that followed in this famous Declaration of Independence, a new nation was born. But it would not be a simple birth. Perhaps, in fact, birth is the wrong metaphor for the wars of independence or the Revolutionary Wars or whatever you want to call them, those wars which decided the creation of the United States of America. Those wars were perhaps more an acrimonious divorce that, more than 200 years later, has transformed into a hopefully still valued platonic friendship. When the 13 colonies declared their independence in July 1776, it was not necessarily clear to people what was beginning. To some in Parliament, this was a simple colonial tax revolt of the sort resolved many times before. Others saw it as a civil war between British colonists of different political points of view. Others saw it as a fight for political independence from an empire with a view to creating a new sort of democracy, and perhaps, in the fullness of time, we can see that these later visionaries turned out to be correct. However, the creation of an independent United States of America at this time, in this way, was not a foregone conclusion. Then, what happened at Yorktown made it a virtual certainty, such that even George III, with his periodic bouts of madness, and Prime Minister Lord North, with his shattered reputation, could no longer deny the obvious. It is a cliche that history is written by the winners. In one sense, this has always been true, as the version of history that is most likely to survive is that which is perpetuated by the unconquered power. However, the wars of independence are recent enough, and the British Empire remained powerful enough, that we have detailed accounts for both sides of this fight. In the 21st century, with Britain and the United States sharing a friendship and an alliance, however recently strained it has been, and with the American culture so ubiquitous and so loved in the United Kingdom, narratives surrounding the Revolutionary War can be confusing for a Brit. The British were on the losing side, yet it seems people don't seem to mind this, and it isn't necessarily seen as some terrible defeat, despite the fact that it absolutely was to those who lived through it. When we see films like The Patriot or shows like Hamilton, there may be some grumbling over historical accuracy or the stereotype of the British villain in Hollywood, but most people have no reservations in cheering for the protagonists and the winning side against the unjust, imperialist British. I'm not going to undermine any of these things, and yet I am going to take a slight risk. The story of the Siege of Yorktown is doubtless well known to many of this audience, wherever they are from, and it is told from the point of view from the victorious Continental and French armies of America. Here, in hope of interest and originality, I will attempt to tell this story purely from the perspective of the vanquished British. Washington and Lafayette, where they appear at all, will be viewed as it were from a distance, as from the ramparts of the British bastions, not in the foreground of the narrative. And so just for a moment, allow yourself to don a red coat and see the birth of the glorious nation through the eyes of those who lost it. Do you think I'm going to get away with this, Emma?
I hope so, but all I can think now is the song "Guns and Ships" from Hamilton.
Well, that's probably going to be at the forefront of your mind. But we're the other side now. Imagine that guy waving the white flag at the end where they're playing The World Turned Upside Down. That's whose side you're going to have to be on just for a moment.
Yeah, I know, but all I care about is Lafayette, to be honest.
He is, let's face it, the best character in the whole show, isn't he?
Yeah, he is the best character in the whole show, has the best bits. I'm here for Lafayette.
Maybe George III running him a close second, I think. But
George III has, 11 minutes on stage? 7 or 11 minutes on stage, and let me tell you, powerful.
Absolutely right. Yeah, he makes the most of those. So you're familiar with the Siege of Yorktown? We will go through what happens in the battle in a moment. We'll go through the history, but do you know
I'm not familiar. I haven't a clue.
No.
So this is all new to me.
I wonder how well known it is among the listenership, because I think actually in Britain, Hamilton probably is the reason that most people have heard of it now, although it is, I believe, much more famous in America. It's one of the most important founding battles of that nation. So as I tell this story, it will, like I say, be from the point of view of the British, and hopefully that will provide an interesting new perspective on it. So, tongue firmly in cheek. Shall we get into it?
Let's go.
In the years after the Declaration of Independence, the British response to the rebellion against the King and his Parliament had been full of confidence, which to their enemies must have seemed indistinguishable from arrogance. However, 5 years later, the war had changed. To people in Britain, it was all very far away and expensive. No matter what had been thrown at them, the Continental Army would not be beaten. They could be beaten back with heavy losses, and then they would reform. They seemed to have spies and local support everywhere, and they seemed to genuinely believe in this chance to forge a new nation without a king. Only that could explain their commitment to the cause and their refusal to bend the knee. That, and the support of their French allies, happy to bankrupt their own monarchy to discredit another. However unpopular Louis XVI was becoming with his own people, defeating the British was always going to be popular. And the troops, ships, and experience brought by the commanders like Lafayette and de Grasse would help give Washington the edge. The 5,000 or so British and Loyalist soldiers who had fallen back to Yorktown, along with some 3,000 Hessian volunteers, found themselves cut off. Lord Cornwallis had ordered the outer defences abandoned, and these were quickly taken over by Continental and French forces. The hope had been that by concentrating guns and troops along the inner bastions, the promised 10,000 men to reinforce the British would level the odds. However, any hope of reinforcement or evacuation by the Royal Navy had ended with the British defeat at Chesapeake Bay. The British guns fired token resistance toward the American and French allies, but to no avail. As night fell on the 6th of October, rain began to fall. The full moon was cloaked by heavy cloud, and the rain and thunder obscured the sound of pickaxes as an enormous trench was dug to invest the surrounded British lines. Occasional lightning flashes gave glimpses of the engineers at work, and the British will was sapped by the sound of trenches being dug closer and closer and closer to the defences at Yorktown, albeit just out of musket range. Aside from some sniping by German sharpshooters, little could be done but wait. The defenders looked on in dismay as more and more Allied artillery was drawn up on three sides of the town, with only the sea to their backs. Clearly, Washington and Rochambeau intended to bombard them, either into surrender or at least blast a breach into their defences. They could be seen riding with impunity from position to position, inspecting their preparations. The only small piece of fortune was the slither of information provided by a French deserter that a planned French attack was only a bluff, but it did nothing to change the likely outcome. Between the 7th and the 9th of October, still more artillery arrived, with mouths gaping on the frustrated redcoats. Then it began. The French fired first, forcing one of the few remaining British ships to be scuttled by its crew. A couple of hours later, the American guns followed suit. Apparently, one of the first shots smashed a table at which British officers were dining. Didn't matter if it was true or not, at least it showed that the officers shared the privations of their men, and that might be enjoyed with a wry smile. The deafening bombardment continued through the night, dismantling the British defences and silencing whatever defending cannon remained. By morning, it was becoming obvious that the ranks were thinning. Some were in the hospital, wailing from incurable wounds or facing the surgeon's amputation saw with whatever fortitude could be summoned. Others, it was obvious, had used the chaos to slip off and surrender to the besieging forces. Even Cornwallis's headquarters found itself smashed, and mortar fire set fire to ships and caused many others to be scuttled. More word of reinforcements was hopeless. Yorktown was ready to fall. More digging could be heard and more trenches ringed the town, closer yet, then silence. That was agony. Where before there had been fevered activity, now there was only stillness on a moonless night, the 14th of October. Shadows seemed to shift. Could their eyes believe what they saw? Not a sound, nor a glimmer from the attackers, their buckles clearly blackened with tallow soot. Breath faltered, and hands gripped loaded Brown Bess muskets with a nervous energy. Redoubts numbers 9 and 10 had been heavily bombarded, but the defenders remained. Suddenly, a roar and a sight of flashes in the night as the French attack was going in. But was this the diversion? The answer came suddenly. The sound of axes hacking at timber defences, the shout of a sentry, and then the onrush of glinting steel. Barely a shot was fired as the Americans took the redoubts at the point of bayonets. The gates of Yorktown had been wedged open by a continental boot. This meant that artillery fire could be directed from the abandoned British defences. More surrenders, more artillery, more empty promises of reinforcement. Some soldiers were disgusted by the desertions, but it might be that they envied those that for these men, at least the siege and all of its deprivations was over. By the 16th of October, more guns pounded Yorktown. A half-hearted attempt to evacuate across the York River failed, and it became a case of waiting for one of two inevitable conclusions: death in some form or other, or capitulation. As dawn broke on the 17th of October, an officer waved a white flag of surrender from atop the ramparts, and, sportingly, the bombardment abated. Colonel Dundas and Major Ross marched forward to discuss terms. Apparently, aside from some arguments over details, the fight was over. The remaining defenders were at least relieved to be told that they would be allowed to leave with honour, bayonets fixed and colours flying, playing an American tune as a tribute to the victors. They put on fresh uniforms from the stores to put on the proudest face one could in the face of abject defeat. Then the order came. There would be no flags flying or cold steel fixed. Muskets were shouldered and flags were furled. Fair enough. Defeated American armies had not been granted the honours of war and defeat either. One wag quipped that the band ought to play the old English Civil War ballad, "The World Turned Upside Down." But some German march was played instead. Arms were laid down with sufficient force to break them wherever possible until an Allied officer put a stop to it. Apparently, the officers at each side dined with remarkable civility. How easy they found it to be gentlemanly after such savagery. The fall of Yorktown meant for sure that Britain no longer had the will to contest its American possessions. Those colonies would be left to whatever independent future they saw fit. What a proud heritage they were giving up on for the sake of some taxes. Good luck to them, these colonial upstarts. They're going to need it. So that's my telling of the Siege of Yorktown.
Okay, no, I did know that basically from Hamilton. So
You did.
when you said it, I was like, I don't know anything about the Siege of Yorktown. Then you were talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, no, I know this.
Yeah, actually, they get a remarkable number of nice elements in that, but it must have been terrifying to know that people were creeping closer and closer.
Do you know what?
There's nothing you can do.
Do you know what I wrote down? I
Go
just
on.
wrote down silence.
Yeah.
Fuck me. If you know people are digging, you know that people are coming. There's artillery fire. There's all of this activity, a hive of activity, and then nothing. That nothing must have been horrific.
Yeah.
Because they must have been thinking, just fucking strike or do something, because we can't
get on with it.
Sit and wait like this. But it's a pretty powerful thing to leave somebody waiting.
It is. I mean, this is something I think of with the First World War, when you had sappers underground who were digging the mines to lay explosives under the trenches. And there was always the idea that if you could hear the dull scraping and thudding of people digging underground, that was fine. You were in no danger at all. Yeah. The worry came when you heard the scraping and the shoveling, and then it stopped. Because then, of course, that's it. The explosives are laid, and at any point it's going to go up in terrible flames and mud. So they might not have had that technology during the American Revolutionary War, but my word, it must have been just devastating to know. We got the sea to our backs. The most powerful navy in the world cannot help us. They've been beaten as well. We've been completely forgotten about. We've been abandoned here. We are done for. And by that point, people in England like saying, well, yeah, it's really embarrassing. It's devastating, but we're going to expand into other places. We'll make the best of it. And these poor guys are out there doing it. We're completely and utterly abandoned. And I think it's worth remembering too, because it's not always acknowledged, how many people who were American born who fought on the side of the British, the loyalist side as well. Yeah. They were on the losing side, and that must have been a bit embarrassing to deal with afterwards. Say, yeah, sorry about that, backed the wrong horse, but hey, we're all Americans now. Woo, 4th of July.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? There's so many people who didn't. You think that everybody who was American would have backed the American side, but they didn't. Of course, they didn't.
Sometimes the status quo was very attractive, wasn't it?
Yes, of course, and it's what you know, it's what you're used to, and yeah, how interesting.
It is fascinating, and of course, it's another one of those sites where there's a real energy to place, but there are lots of great, genuine folk stories, and I love an American ghost story as well. There's something about the old medieval streets of England things, but there's something about the immediacy and recency compared with the American stories that really appeals to me. So should we get into some hauntings now?
Let's get into some hauntings. I'm excited.
More deadly even than the fighting in this siege was the ever-present spectre of disease. This foe did not discriminate on the basis of loyalty or wealth, and all sides suffered from the effects of typhus, malaria, and dysentery. John Jackie Park Custis was one such victim of the sickness spreading through the ranks. Born to Mary Custis, his name obscures his high-status connections. Mary Custis is better known by her name from her second marriage, Martha Washington. Jackie Custis was the stepson of the general himself. He rarely showed much aptitude in any particular field, but eventually found employment as his stepfather's aide-de-camp. Washington was fond of his slightly wayward stepson, and Jackie was desperate to please his stepfather. His sheltered upbringing meant that he struggled with camp life and the mud, blood, and filth surrounding everything. Jackie picked up a disease, probably typhus, and quickly fell gravely ill. All the while, he desperately begged to leave and rush to the front lines, though he was no condition to do so. Washington did what he could, summoning the best medical care available. At this time, there was no understanding of the actual cause of disease, and while the pseudoscience of balancing the humours in the body was dying out by the 1780s, the recommended treatment for typhus remained taking blood. In Jackie's case, this was done with the doctor's fleam blades rather than leeches. Needless to say, the treatment was ineffective, and Jackie Custis died from his affliction. Today, though, witnesses report a phantom rushing towards the position of the Allied entrenchments. The folklore states that this is the ghost of John Park Custis. The reason for this assertion gives a real sense of how chilling this spirit must be to behold. He is seen as semi-transparent, with Jackie's distinctive blonde hair, a filthy white nightshirt, and blood-stained bandages around his ankles from where the doctor's futile treatments had been played. Perhaps his soul still yearns to rush for the front lines and prove his bravery to his illustrious stepfather. Within Yorktown itself are even more reported hauntings. One of the most reputedly active locations is the Thomas Nelson House. Thomas Nelson, whose house this had been, was a signatory to the Declaration of Independence and had been named Governor of Virginia. It is clear where his loyalties lay. As the bombardment was set to commence, Lafayette asked Nelson to relate his local knowledge to better direct the Allied fire. "To what particular spot would your excellency direct that I should point the cannon?" Nelson replied. "There, to that house. It is mine, and it is the best one in town. There you will be almost certain to find Lord Cornwallis and the British headquarters." This is the root of the legend that the first shot wrecked the British officers' dining party. The accuracy of the cannon of the age meant that relatively few shots found so precise a mark, and those that did could be deadly. The house contained hidden passages built to aid the movement of servants around the house without getting in the way of their social betters. During a heavy period of bombardment, one redcoat took shelter in such a passageway, only to have his body obliterated in a shower of brick and masonry as it took a direct hit from an iron cannonball. He could not have known what hit him, quite literally, and it seems his immortal soul has struggled to realise that his life was so suddenly snuffed out. Ever since, the panicked apparition of this soldier replays his final moments of entering the secret passage where he assumed he could find safety. In the early 1900s, a new owner to the house was hosting a dinner party. Although they weren't hosting a séance, conversation nonetheless turned to the subject of ghosts. The owner related the story of the doomed redcoat, struck down in the secret passageway, to which one of the guests scoffed incredulously. At that very moment, the concealed door to the now blocked passageway burst open with an icy blast of air, stunning the diners into a terrified silence, prompting them to quickly dispatch the last of their meal. In an incident of continuity, 81 years later, the house was used as a Union hospital in the Civil War. Hauntings associated with it include the sound of the wounded in pain and the smell of rotting, gangrenous flesh that would have pervaded this formerly grand room. Most moving, perhaps, is the ghost of a young soldier who had fallen for a nurse that cared for him. Despite the best available care, he died in the converted attic, where it is said he roams looking for his love. A perhaps related haunting is the sobbing of a young woman heard in one of the bedrooms on the upper floor just below the attic space. Still, this is one of the grandest houses in Yorktown. The Thomas Nelson House has seen its share of violence and sadness. Perhaps, too, these feelings echo in the stories of the ghosts said to walk its floors. At the opposite end of the scale, in terms of status, are the caves, known as the Cornwallis Caves. It is unlikely that Cornwallis ever reduced himself to hiding in these caves, but the association with the siege was an obvious one, and the name has stuck. Instead, these caves were likely where the civilians of Yorktown sought refuge from the bombardment. Conditions would have been horrendous. Many of the inhabitants would have been suffering wounds, and there would have been everyone from the very young to the very elderly sheltering in cramped corners with very little light, stale air, and scarce food or water. Following the Revolutionary Wars, the caves were extended and used as storage, possibly by smugglers escaping the attentions of the revenue men. But since that time, the sound of the crying, wailing, and terrified people has been sensed. The smells of the filth and the smoke from their meagre cooking fires persist, and the barked orders from soldiers are heard in the entranceway. Today, the caves are dangerously unstable, and they've been blocked off to visitors. Perhaps this also entombs these disembodied voices forever, or until some intrepid person goes and ventures back in. When British forces capitulated, the article of surrender was signed at a building called the Moore House. This historically significant moment may have impressed upon its walls a persistent energy. However, a slightly earlier event, a personal tragedy, also left an impression. One man caught in the bombardment was John Turner, whose mortally wounded body was brought into the Moore House and tended by his devoted wife, Clara. The little she could do could not prevent his passing, and so struck with grief was she that she died soon after. John Turner's body was buried within the grounds of the Moore House, and a common sighting is that of a weeping woman in a long dress pacing the grounds of the Moore House. Could this be the spirit of Clara seeking out her husband's grave? Once the surrender had been agreed, the British soldiers filed out of Yorktown as described before, with furled flags and shouldered arms. Local people turned out in large numbers to witness the moment. The emotional charge must have been very strong. The British redcoats perhaps felt a mix of shame, relief, and exhaustion. The Continental Army and French felt triumph and perhaps some sympathy. For local people, feelings were probably just as varied, with loyalists fearing for the future and revolutionaries excited for what it would hold. Where the British marched out and laid down their arms is now known as the Surrender Field. Tourists report hearing the pipes and drums of the British and Hessian bands marching out, with many reporting that they are playing the tune "The World Turned Upside Down." Though, of course, the historical basis for this is very debated. Yorktown, as one of the most important locations in the foundation of the United States, undoubtedly has stories to tell, whether those are to be found in the histories or as ghostly echoes in the rebuilt colonial houses and streets of this historic town.
I would like to say that I love the drama of the red coat in the secret passageway and the door bursting open and the icy breeze. That's the kind of haunting I want to be doing.
I absolutely love it.
I want to be there the minute somebody says, "Oh, that's a ridiculous story. I don't believe in that." Then I want to burst forth somehow. And be like,
Excuse me?
Excuse me? What do you mean I'm not real? Get fucked. That's what I want. I love the drama of that.
Yeah.
Just
I looked into it as well, and the door is still there, but it's been blocked from the other end, so it's unlikely to be a draft coming through either.
I love that you looked that up.
Yeah, I had to. Otherwise, I'd say, "Oh, you know what it's like, Emma. I'm going to debunk that now because, oh no, wait, I can't do that."
No, we're not
I'm afraid I
debunking
can't
it
debunk that one
because we love the drama of it.
We do.
I also
imagine that meal though. It'd been so awkward that they'd just have to finish up, wouldn't they?
My God, imagine how awkward it would have been. I'd be sitting there looking at the person who said that's definitely not true, and I'd be like, "See what you did."
Yeah.
Even if you don't believe it, sometimes it's better to say nothing at all. Okay.
Say sorry. Say sorry.
Say sorry. Go and stand at that weird, spooky doorway and say sorry. Okay. Thank you. I also loved the drama of, is it Jackie
Custis? Yeah.
Custis. I wrote it down, but I can't read my own writing. I love the drama of this spectre of him running into battle from his deathbed, literally
in a nightshirt with blood on his ankles,
covered in blood.
What a sight!
What
That'd
a
be horrendous, wouldn't it?
I mean, and I also feel like there's an element of that which is probably a useful metaphor for this idea of fighting for what you believe in, that you would fight from your deathbed, and even after death you're still fighting for what you believe in, right? So there's a kind of a useful imagery there, I think. But my God, this blonde semi-transparent figure tearing into battle in his nightgown covered in blood, riddled with typhus.
It's that sense as well of the inadequacies that he clearly felt. Being, I'm not really your son, but I really would like to be, because you're not just anyone. You are the general, not a general. Yes. You are the general. You are George Washington himself.
Yeah, and you have to let me fight. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, such an incredibly dramatic sort of scene, isn't it? And by all accounts, Washington seemed to be very fond of him as well.
I've got a question, which again is, sorry, this is becoming a health-based podcast.
Go on,
what exactly is typhus?
You know what? I'm not massively familiar with it myself. It's spread by lice, isn't it?
Right. Well, do you know what? We're going to Google as we speak.
Why don't we just delve into the Bodleian Library right away and have a quick look at their medical section? I think it's a disease spread by lice, an infectious disease.
Yes, it is spread by fleas, lice, or chiggers. I don't know what a chigger is.
That's a bedbug, isn't it?
Some sort of little bedbug, I assume. So it high fever, headache, chills, tiredness, muscle aches. Yeah. It's
a pretty unpleasant way to go. But you can imagine in camp conditions, that'd be really, really easy to get. I mean, pretty much everyone had lice back then.
It's referred to as camp fever, jail fever, and war fever is what it was referred to.
I mean, even in the First World War, when people were getting, the soldiers were getting what they were calling trench fever, and it was like typhus, but it wasn't anything like severe. It just sort of gives you sort of flu symptoms for a week or something. So it is the sort of thing that those filthy conditions would have spread. And of course, they got no knowledge of what causes it, and they got even less knowledge of how to fix it. And if that seems like a bit of a daft thing, pretty much anyone in those conditions, and actually just many of you people in the street, would have had lice back then. So you're not going to pin the blame on the lice because everyone's got them. So surely everyone should have the disease. So instead, you go towards these desperate remedies of balancing the humours with different leeches and trying various concoctions. And it's really just trying anything in the hope that something will work. And they kind of know by this point that balancing the humours doesn't work anymore. They've known that for about 100 years.
Yeah.
But in the absence of anything better, at least it makes them feel a bit lightheaded and they get some sleep.
And you're kind of like, well, beggars can't be choosers because we don't have anything else to do with it. Basically, nowadays it's just treated with antibiotics.
Yeah, it's that simple. Yeah,
that's kind of it.
Which is why people always say to me, if you could live at any point in history, when would it be? I always go, well, now. I mean, obviously now. Even now. Yeah, even 100 years ago, it would have been awful. So no, now
I don't want to get a stomach bug and die. Thank you very much.
I might be allergic to penicillin, but I'm perfectly happy to try any of the other antibiotics you've got. Please and thank you.
Please and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, that was just my question. I was like, what the fuck is actually typhus? Because you read about it all the time. You hear about it all the time, but I actually didn't know what it was.
Well, I'm glad that when you put me on the spot, and I thought, oh blimey, I should know that. I did in fact know it, so I'm going to give myself a little gold star.
Well done.
There we
go. Done.
The other thing with this is I really like the fact that the Nelson House, the Thomas Nelson House, it's the fact that he was there and everyone would say, that's my house, go and shoot it. It's blatantly full of all the British officers.
I love that he's like, that's the best house in the town. Do you know who's going to be there? All those British officers. Blow that up.
And it's how often these places are repurposed into the hospital as well. Again, the Union side did that in the Civil War, just like the story we had in Gettysburg, where you had the sort of time slip with the surgeons' quarters there as well. There is that sense of continuity there. But there does seem to be a theme, doesn't there? There seems to be a lot of weeping women and tragic soldiers.
I was sort of thinking about this with weeping women, right? If I die and I become a ghost and I'm somehow a weeping woman, just get a priest in and send me on my way, because I don't want to be known as a weeping woman. I would rather be a woman that's like raging around. You know what I mean? The
cursing woman, aren't you?
Yeah, the cursing woman, the swearing woman. Yeah. You know, I don't want to be a weeping woman. I want to be angry.
Yeah. Do you know what? I don't think you've got any worries there. I think you'll be leaving the old stone tape theory of you go, Hades, what now, sort of thing, and all of that rage and all that craziness that you tend to put out there, and which we all love. Of course, we wouldn't change you for the world.
Obviously, I just think it's impossible to hear stories about these places where these monumental events have occurred. And like you said, you know, even these buildings being repurposed as field hospitals.
Yeah.
Like even that in itself must leave an indelible stain, an indelible mark on the landscape, right? And it's the one thing, you know, I have obviously done this for 6 years, and like you're very much skeptical and you like to find logical and rational explanations for things.
I do.
But I sometimes think that there are things that happen in history that just leave a mark. And whether that comes in the form of the sound of galloping hooves, or whether that is a man tearing into battle in his fucking nightgown covered in blood, you know what I mean? Whether it's those things, I feel like those events just they change the fabric of a place.
I think I'm with you on that one there. And also, let's not forget, although this is, I think, rightly and most commonly described as an American story, it isn't. It's a human story, and it's an American and a British story if you want to put that side on things. But there was, of course, one winner. But I do like to think that Brits like myself, we've got a lovely friend out of it. And I've been to the States. I absolutely love going to America. I love going to the States. I've been to various parts of America, and that's the thing that is so easy to forget. It's so huge, isn't it? And it's so different from one side to the other. And I know we don't get political in this podcast, whatever people's opinions and divisions that are going on at the moment. I am hopeful that whatever goes on, we share so much as two cultures, and we've got so much friendship that that's going to stay there. And let's not forget, it started in a really strange way, in the throwing down of muskets as the soldiers marched out of Yorktown, and as they finally said, enough is enough.
Oh, do you know what? Also, I didn't write it down, but it occurred to me as you were reading. You said the soldiers shouldered their arms, right?
Yeah,
And I was like, the fuck does that mean? Because I was thinking about their arms that are on their body, not their
yeah.
actual weapons. So I was there looking. Because you're reading, so you're not watching me, and I was looking at the screen going, has he meant to say that? What do you mean he had? Surely they all had shoulders. Like what? At the end of their
I knew I
arms?
should
What
have
are you
rewritten.
talking about? And then when I
I
thought
knew I
about it,
should
I
have
was like,
rewritten that.
oh, he means arms, as in weapons on their
Yeah,
shoulders. Oh, that was,
shoulder
and
arms.
then
It's an order, isn't it?
yeah, it's an order, and I did not connect that. I would not be good in the army. I'd be like, surely everybody has a shoulder,
I should
or
have done
is it
better
just
though,
me?
because when I was redrafting this the other night and rereading it, because I wrote this actually a few months ago, and I wanted to just make sure that all my spellings were correct and everything. I thought, oh, is it going to be obvious what I meant by shouldered arms? Because I should say sort of shouldered muskets or something, shouldn't I? But no, it's the order is shouldered arms. I kept it like that. But of course, the imagery there is that if you're marching out with military honour, you are presenting arms, and so that in a sense you are ready to lower your musket and lower the bayonet, and there you go. Whereas if you're
Yeah.
shouldered arms, you are pointing out to everyone that we are not a threat. Our flags are furled, which is a great dishonour, and yes, we're going to throw our muskets down hard enough to break them if possible until the Continental Army says, no, we might want those, thank you very much. So you put them down nice and gently, people. But yes, yet again, we've got a horrible fight, which is essentially settled with a bunch of posh blokes over a nice dinner.
Standard.
Yep, always a way, isn't it? If only they could have thought of that first, eh?
Yeah, just
But
have a
lot of
nice
it's not.
dinner is sort of, I think that would be my answer to everything. Let's just have a nice dinner.
And you never know, maybe a secret passage is going to blow open and scare everyone to death.
I mean, I would love that. Yeah, and I'm not somebody that's easily scared, so I would find great entertainment in that, I have to say.
Well, you know what? I think they got their money's worth that day. They weren't there for a seance or anything. But if you're going to talk ill of some ghosts who live in the walls, you better think twice.
You got to be prepared for the consequences.
I bet this has still run to over an hour, hasn't it? Probably.
Oh yeah, it definitely has. It definitely has. I'm looking at the time here. We've been recording for 2 hours. So yeah.
And to think that, the last time I tried to get 4 battles in there, I think 2 was plenty, wasn't it?
Yeah. What were we thinking?
Oh, God, no idea. We weren't, were we? That should have been 2 episodes. It absolutely should have been.
Yeah,
I kind of enjoyed the chaos of it, though. I think that's been a little bit more manageable tonight. But I've got another story to go. Not tonight, but I've got another one written and ready to go that was originally meant to be the third part of this one, but it's expanded into its own mini epic.
Oh, that's exciting. Are you able to give us a clue about where it pertains to?
Sure, I can do. The thing is, we've been managing these episodes about once every 2 months. It's kind of worked with, I think, both our schedules, really, hasn't it?
Yes.
And by that point, by July, I would have finished all the exam preparation and things, and that would have all gone. And teaching will still be busy, but I'll be more ready. But it'll also coincide with the time of year that is associated with this place. And my next episode is going to be all about the old airbase at RAF Biggin Hill. So that was going to be another battlefield, a battlefield with a difference. But actually, I realised that no, there's a lot more going on in and around Biggin Hill, but it absolutely deserves its own episode. So we've got that to look forward to.
Oh, happy days. Tim, it has been an absolute pleasure. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Absolutely. So I'm very lucky. I've got my own YouTube channel that I've populated with lots of videos about historical events and people. It's called Mr. Cloke History. Now, I made it actually as a way of delivering revision and resources to my school pupils, but it's kind of grown and got a life of its own now. And I've just finished a series on crime and punishment through time. So if you're interested in learning more about that, have a look at my rapid revision series on crime and punishment through time. And you know what? You'd be doing me a real favour, because the British GCSE examination period is going to come up, and I'm going to get a massive spike in views, hopefully, and subscriptions. And then it will absolutely die a death for about 3 months, and YouTube will assume that I've posted something absolutely dreadful, and the algorithm will simply cancel me. So if you can drop me a subscription or a few likes, I'll be very, very grateful. I don't like begging, but here we are. I think I just did.
That's not begging. That is just simply asking people to subscribe to your YouTube channel. And I think that's a reasonable request, to be honest.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be really grateful. And hey, you might well enjoy it.
Exactly. People might enjoy it. Tim, it has been an absolute pleasure. And I love doing these recordings with you.
I love doing them, mate. I really do.
It brings me such joy. And I really appreciate how much time and effort goes into doing these recordings for you. Time is scarce when you're a secondary school teacher and you're as busy as you are, but also the time that goes into writing and researching these episodes, I really appreciate it. And you are a wonderful person, and I think that you should keep the mustache.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Emma. I can't necessarily promise to keep the mustache, but we'll see what the reviews are like at the weekend, shall we?
And on that note, we shall see you next time.
Cheers, dears.
Did you know that selling your home is one of the top 5 most stressful things you do in your lifetime? Hi, I'm Sarah Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Empower Home Team with Keller Williams. Debbie and I are here to help remove the stress of selling your home by guaranteeing in writing that if your home doesn't sell, we will buy it. That's our guarantee. Many agents promise to sell your home, but can they guarantee it in writing? We can. Call us to sell your home today, guaranteed. 703-637-SOLD or go to DebbieHasTheBuyers.com.